In pleading with the king for her life, Esther had exposed the scheme of Haman. Haman hadn't realized Esther was a Jew. In condemning all Jews, he was directly opposing the king, seeking to kill the queen. And the eunuchs quickly revealed the fact that Haman had built gallows at his house to execute Mordecai, who had saved the life of the king. So the king instructed that Haman be executed on those gallows that he had built, on his own gallows. We continue the story in chapter 8 of Esther. On that day, King Ahasuerus gave Queen Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told how he was related to her. So the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther appointed Mordecai over the house of Haman. Now Esther spoke again to the king, fell down at his feet, and implored him with tears to counteract the evil of Haman, the Agagite, and the scheme which he had devised against the Jews. And the king held out the golden sceptre toward Esther. So Esther arose and stood before the king, and said, If it pleases the king, and if I have found favour in his sight, and the thing seems right to the king, and I am pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman, the son of Habadathah the Agagite, which he wrote to annihilate the Jews who are in all the king's provinces. For how can I endure to see the evil that will come to my people? Or how can I endure to see the destruction of my countrymen? Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and Mordecai the Jew, Indeed, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and they have hanged him on the gallows because he tried to lay his hand on the Jews. You yourselves write a decree concerning the Jews, as you please, in the king's name, and seal it with the king's signet ring. For whatever is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's signet ring, no one can revoke. So the king's scribes were called at that time, in the 3rd month, which is the month of Sivan, on the 23rd day. And it was written, according to all that Mordecai commanded, to the Jews, the satraps, the governors, and the princes of the provinces, from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces in all, to every province in its own script, to every people in their own language, and to the Jews in their own script and language. And he wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus, sealed it with the king's signet ring, and sent letters by couriers on horseback, riding on royal horses bred from swift steeds. By these letters the king permitted the Jews, who were in every city, to gather together and protect their lives, to destroy, kill, and annihilate all the forces of any people or province that would assault them, both little children and women, and to plunder their possessions, on one day in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. A copy of the document was to be issued as a decree in every province, and published for all people, so that the Jews would be ready on that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. The couriers who rode on royal horses went out, hastened and pressed on by the king's command, and the decree was issued in Shushan the citadel. So Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal apparel of blue and white, with a great crown of gold, and a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. The Jews had light and gladness, joy and honour. And in every province and city, wherever the king's command and decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a holiday. Then many of the people of the land became Jews, because fear of the Jews fell upon them. My name's Arthur, and I thank you for joining me as we share from Esther chapter 8. The laws of the Medes and Persians cannot be altered or revoked. The enemies can still come against the Jews. All one can do is add another law. The Jews may defend themselves and retaliate. They may gather together, and those who come against them, they are permitted to kill and to take their possessions. And so, rather than being just a massacre of the Jews, it in fact would become a test of who would win the battle, for the Jews could defend themselves. What's actually happening here is that the whole society has heard about the turn of events. The blame is plainly laid at Haman's door, and he has been executed for it. So this gives everybody a message from the king himself that he does not tolerate this anti-Semitism that is around. For the king has plainly declared, "Indeed, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and they have hanged him on the gallows because he tried to lay his hand on the Jews." This is much broader than just saying because he attacked the queen and threatened Mordecai. We learned previously that Haman was extremely wealthy, and all of that now belongs to Esther and is administered by Mordecai on her behalf. But also we find that Mordecai is introduced to the king and is trusted by the king and quickly increases in status in the kingdom. The honours that belong to Haman have now suddenly been transferred to Mordecai. He has been given the king's signet ring to work out the response, to sign a decree, and to deliver the response in the king's name, according to the law. The matter was urgent, so we're told of the magnificent horses, the royal horses bred from swift steeds, who deliver the message throughout the whole kingdom, from Ethiopia to India. Wherever the Jews had been dispersed, and they are dispersed throughout the whole world, they were entitled to defend themselves and to destroy their enemies. These decrees were all limited to one particular day, the 13th day of the 12th month. And the Jewish people, even today, celebrate a feast they call Purim, and they celebrate that God will indeed turn the tables on the enemies of his people. The scriptures plainly declare that the kingdoms of this world will become the kingdoms of the Lord and his Christ. God's people pray, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." But not everybody on earth is yet seeking to obey God. The battle still goes on, and it is heating up at this present time. We've had a huge push in recent times, promoting the murder of babies in the womb, saying they are not people, but they are people, and the murder of 100,000 innocent Australian babies every year is a huge cost to our society. But the government doesn't even want to count the number, and some politicians want to increase that number. Esther could plead for her life, but these babies are not even given that opportunity. There's no justice in this, but a blatant disregard for human life. The right of a woman over her own body is to say no to conception, not to compound one sin, immorality, with another, murder. Just as judgment came upon Haman, so judgment will come on those who in wickedness would destroy innocent life. And the one who was rejected, "We will not have this man reign over us," will be exalted to become King of Kings in this world, even as Mordecai, who stood at the king's gate, is now exalted by the king.